welcome to the Wellbeing Evolution. I am sat here with Dr. Richard Remelie. This is actually the first episode, so we're going to just have a brief introduction of us both. So I myself am a working private practice therapist in Manchester at the moment, psychotherapist I should point out. My background is in education to some degree. I was also a former Buddhist monk, so I say that because it's relevant to the content of the channel, which is going to be, anything connected with well-being really. So it's quite a broad concept, but I suppose if we were going to ballpark the themes, it would be certainly philosophy, neurology, which is something I'm studying at the moment. I'm doing an MSc in neuroscience at the moment at King's, and that's going to be an element that's focused on, but not necessarily exclusively, and also not necessarily either, I should say. So yeah, philosophy, Western and Eastern, psychology obviously, sociology will also be involved. That's probably enough of me blathering on. So, Richard, how about you?
Hello. I've recently become a lecturer in the sociology department at Manchester Metropolitan University. I've done a PhD in education, and my undergraduate background was in sociology and psychology. I'm neither a psychologist nor a philosopher, but I have a big interest in both of them. So looking forward to hearing more from Roger in this episode.
All right, so the kind of title of this, or at least the broad focus of this episode, is on talking and why is it therapeutic. I suppose we should give mention to Carl Rogers. I feel like I want to give him a nod because I think so much of what he outlined, and in terms of his own insight, what he described as being beneficial with therapeutic talking especially, is important. Maybe I should I'll outline this. So in Rogerian or person-centered therapy, there are what are called the core conditions. Now it also does depend on whether we're talking about the three core conditions or there's a further elaborate version of the core conditions, but the three core conditions are empathy, congruence, and unconditional positive regard, which is sometimes abbreviated to UPR. So UPR is it's quite a challenge because really it is unconditional, right? And calling something unconditional requires quite a lot of acceptance. We sometimes talk about unconditional love, right? But there aren't many, at least romantic relationships, that actually are unconditional. There's quite a lot of conditions we tend to ask of partners. So within the therapeutic process, you're working on not only your perspective of having unconditional positive regard, but then also communicating that through the way that you are interacting with your client. So It's not simply, I would walk in with a client and go, right, I've got unconditional positive regard. I'd also have to kind of slowly cultivate that, and that it's certainly not something, I don't think, that's going to be established in one session. I mean, you can give indications of it, right? But it doesn't mean it's going to happen.
Yeah, so let's sort of break it down a little bit, maybe more fundamentally. So people are coming, as a psychotherapist, people are paying to talk to you, right? Mm-hmm. But I'm sure most people have other people that they can talk to in their lives. So why What is valuable, would you say, about the therapeutic space or therapeutic relationships, so that people can talk in a way that they're unable to talk to other people? What's going on? What kind of talking is taking place there, I suppose, is the question, that might not be available to people in other relationships they are.
Yeah, I mean, I think the probably universal factor that's present in, you know, whatever professional type of talking therapy it is, you know, whether it's CBT or person-centered or Gestalt or Jungian, or, you know, whichever way we go with it, the main thing that's not present is that you're not trying to, the orientation is not trying to cultivate a relationship that's necessarily going to go into the future, other than the therapeutic relationship. You know, the difficulty, but also the blessing of close relationships, is that we care about how they develop. But of course, when we have that attachment to how they develop, and especially if they are long running, long established relationships, we may not want it to change too much. And if somebody was to reveal something that was very profound but also very painful to a close friend or to a family member, they may be conscious that that could transform the relationship to a point that they just could never get back to. Now, of course, you could argue, well, that might enrich the relationship, and it might, but it might also change it to a point where it may also damage the relationship to some degree. And like I say, there are probably some conditional aspects to many relationships, not just romantic. Whereas within the therapeutic situation, I wouldn't say ideally, because ideally makes it sound, you know, kind of a bit highfalutin. I would say optimally, the client should feel that whatever they say, within the bounds of the, you know, ethical framework and confidentiality limits, etc., that there will be an acceptance and a sense of non-judgment. I think, you know, as the therapist, it's incumbent upon me or any therapist to, what you're trying to do is enter into the client's experience, right? Not working out whether what you think they did or didn't do was right, but really trying to get a very clear picture of what their experience is, with the obvious understanding that I'll never have that 100%, but it's almost like you aim at 100% in order to sort of give yourself a disposition or a trajectory in that way.
So basically then, it's like that the client can speak to someone who's not going to run away. I mean, unless they come out and say, well, I've killed 3 people, and you're gonna have to report that, obviously. But otherwise, it's going to be strictly confidential, and you're going to continue to turn up and listen and try to understand what they say, no matter what it is. So it might be an opportunity to, like you're saying, for them to talk about things they wouldn't otherwise be able to talk about in other relationships, but also it might be an opportunity for them to think things through via talking to you, perhaps before then presenting the topic to someone in another relationship. So I suppose that's something for us to consider there, is the opportunities that the therapeutic relationship provides for people to articulate and then think things through while they're in that process.
Yes, I mean, I think that's exactly, there's so much that is involved when we're talking about the value of articulating yourself, because there is, with the unconditional positive regard, with the core conditions, one hopefully is able to not just articulate the experience that they know, of, you know, that they already are aware of in terms of their own personal history. But it's so common to hear clients as they're talking about their experience to go, and now when I think about it, or now when I hear myself saying it, then something new emerges out of that.
Yeah.
And it's not just that they're sharing their experience, but they're also exploring it and going down avenues of thought. You know, the value of them articulating it to a point where it's understandable is almost like they're pushing into new ground, a new understanding of themselves, and into areas that they may not have ever really considered. And that's the thing, is that it's, you know, we are, hopefully as therapists, we're aware that it's not really us that's doing it as much as the client. You know, the client in many ways should feel to some extent that they've left the process being very active, and experiencing their own agency, because it's not particularly ideal for a client to feel leaving, for instance, that I've sorted them out, you know, that I've cured. You know, curing in psychotherapy is a bit of a kind of, you know, a non-concept really. You're not really supposed to think of curing someone. You're just trying to further understanding, I would say.
Or facilitating.
Facilitating. So it doesn't mean that the therapist doesn't have or offer their own insights. In fact, I'd say if they're not offering their own insights at times, then it's probably got a level of, well, let's say the depth of it is going to be limited if you're not sharing your own insights to some degree. But the client should leave feeling that they've unraveled their own experience, maybe in collaboration, but not like that they've just turned up in the old kind of, you know, I suppose the old-fashioned idea of people going to a shrink, so to speak, and then they get told what's wrong with them, and then they, you know, get, I don't know, prescribed something, or told, you know, do this, and then you'll be sorted out.
Yeah. So it's like, I suppose from your perspective, you don't see yourself as someone that has the answers, but someone who facilitates the client's journey to figuring out what the best ways forward for them are.
Yeah, I mean, of course there's elements of what's presented by a client, which is something that we may have come across a lot. You know, there's thematic kind of experiences as human beings. There's tendencies that can be quite common, but then the other aspect of therapy is that you should be, I mean, when I say should, I mean, it's probably more a case of, it's the best way of me orientating myself to the client is that I don't necessarily know what's going on here, rather than going, oh yeah, okay, you got this, and this, and you need to do this, and this. See you next week, kind of thing. Yeah. I mean, I'm exaggerating there, and there may be times where a client will be talking about anxiety or depression, or, you know, various experiences they've had, where I might point out certain thematic occurrences that can come up, and that's not to sort of devalue or deconstruct or invalidate their individuality. It's more to say, you know, okay, you're having this experience, it's not an unusual human experience necessarily, and there are certain things that you might encounter on the process or on the path of that, but, you know, it's not like I'm just freezing them as a, oh, you've got depression, therefore you're this and this. So yeah, I mean, it's definitely not my role to just sort of get them to tell me what's been going on and then me tell them what's wrong with them. Because even the concept of whether there's something wrong with someone is, I would say, controversial in therapy, especially, you know, modern takes on on experiences like depression and anxiety are that they are to some extent inherent experiences of the human condition. So to pathologize them is possibly not the greatest way to go. I mean, that's becoming much more of a mainstream conventional view. You know, that's probably been in psychotherapy for quite a long time. You know, the idea that if someone is experiencing psychological suffering, that it might not be just an indication there's something wrong with them. It might be an indication that there's some sort of transformation or some sort of change, or an old model or approach to life is now just not working, and something else needs to kind of emerge. Because even now in modern psychiatry, you know, the idea of anxiety, the idea of depression, even psychosis, you know, like somebody having or experiencing delusions or hallucinations in the past, it was often thought of as, oh well, they've got mental illness and they're not normal in some way. Like it was that very binary understanding of what it was. Whereas now it's much more thought of as a scale, and that somebody may experience, I don't know, for instance, as an example, they may hear voices at some point in their life, and then they may never hear them again, and they're not sick. You know, it was just an experience that sometimes human beings can have, and that's that. You know, rather than pathologizing people. So, I think that if a therapist has that understanding and that orientation, then the type of communication and the quality of the interaction is more likely to produce or you know, generate a sense of trust in the client, a sense of openness, and a sense of not being judged. Really, you know.
So we were talking earlier about why it's worthwhile for people to be able to articulate themselves and openly, and we can do that in various ways. So for example, I use a journal where I might write about something that's on my mind, or maybe when, for example, I was examined for PhD, I wrote about that before, thinking about how I was going to deal with it, what was concerning me, and I find it's very therapeutic, I would say, just to write in a journal, or even just to speak aloud to yourself, maybe record it and listen to it back. What would you say are the differences between, for example, me writing in a journal and feeling that's somewhat therapeutic, because it's enabling me to articulate what's on my mind? What do we get from a therapeutic relationship with another person that we wouldn't get perhaps with just writing and articulating ourselves through writing?
Yeah. I mean, I would not like to kind of devalue at all the value of journaling or writing, or, you know, recording yourself even and listening back. I think there's a lot of benefit to it. Many of the benefits that we've just talked about, you know, like articulating yourself, getting clearer on what you think about something, really asking yourself, have I described and produced a precise picture of what I'm actually trying to say? Because that in itself can, you know, there's an element of our relationship with emotion, our emotional life, for instance, that can be a bit disorganized in some way, and so that if you are really talking about something in depth and attempting to be precise and accurate and give a clear impression of experience, that you end up understanding it better yourself, rather than it being all implicit and all vague.
Yeah.
You know, not that things being implicit is bad in itself, but sometimes if we only ever kind of knock up against the very vague impressions of our emotions to a degree where we're not really clearly understood how they sit with each other, or how, or where it's coming from, or what it makes us want to do or not want to do, or what it makes us feel about the world or about others, you know. So that can all be done, I would say, through journaling. But of course, the main benefit of the therapeutic process is there's another mind who is not, does not experience the same boundaries and limits that you do in your cognitive kind of processes.
Yeah.
You know, and equally, they're not experiencing the boundaries that we may have, and that we may to some extent experience, but only in a vague way, because the situation needs to remain vague in order for us to not have the experiences that we're trying to avoid.
Yeah.
So let's say I've got some emotional territory, so to speak, that I always kind of, as soon as I start to encounter it, I obliquely move to the side, and I don't really address it.
So this could be something from needing to renew your passport to needing to end a relationship with someone potentially.
Yeah, like anything that I mean, what, like you say, needing to renew a passport, for somebody that could spike all sorts of anxiety, so they'll always find some other thing to do.
Yeah.
They kind of know they're doing it, but they're not really clear. And sometimes the therapist's role might be to go, but why have you not got that passport? And if they say, well, you know, I needed to do this, I needed to do that, and it's like, yeah, but it's been like 2 years. That's not really, you know, like, so sometimes it is the therapist's role to challenge a bit, you know, not in an aggressive way, but more it's just kind of like holding up the reality and going, or a mirror, you know, going, that doesn't, you know, what you're saying does not match what you're actually doing, or it doesn't match your behaviour or the way that you're thinking. And that, you know, I suppose that's why it's sometimes been paired with religious sort of guru relationships, because that's also one of the main functions of what gurus are supposed to do, you know, that they draw you out of your limitations, that they show you and mirror your limitations as well. Not that I'm suggesting that the therapeutic process or that therapists are gurus. In fact, I'm suggesting that they should never try to be. But there's going to be some, you know, intersection there with certain things to do with a close human relationship. There's always going to be, as there are reflections and sort of, let's say, inflections of close relationships. You know, I mean, you can't really take away the implicit kind of experience of paternity or maternity in a therapeutic relationship. You know, there are human beings are bound to respond to another human being who's male or female or whatever, however they perceive them, as embodying certain qualities that they may then perceive as being, you know, a paternal figure or a maternal figure. And you can't avoid that as a therapist. Doesn't mean that you should necessarily cultivate it, but it can't be avoided, because it's just an inherent human instinct to do that. You know? And I mean, personally, I would say that it's a universal anyway. It's not that it's some kind of Freudian idea that you're just turning everyone into your mother or your father. It's that we all have the capacity to embody and communicate maternal or paternal style relations, you know.
Yeah. In the service of helping the individual to figure it out, whatever it is that they're having issues with, to be in the room in the first place. The idea is, and that sort of links back to what you were saying earlier, that you might not necessarily have any suggestions. Your job might just be to listen, and then through that process of listening and the person articulating themselves, through that process, facilitate their figuring it out for themselves as they're going along.
Yeah, I mean,
which, to sort of link back to what we were talking about, is what you can't get so much maybe if you're just purely writing and articulating on your own. You're not going to get that other person where you might ask the question to facilitate. So what about this? You seem to be brushing that under the carpet.
Yes. Yeah.
You seem to be putting that off.
Yeah, exactly. Like there's those sorts of direct challenges. Then there's also, the metaphor I often use is it's a bit like the client's taking me or guiding me around the library of their mind, so to speak, and I'm not going to go in there and start picking up books and organising them, but I might be like, why have you got a cookbook next to a, I don't know, book on astronomy or something? Like, why is that like that? Or why is there a pile of books in the corner of that room? It's kind of like, I mean, I'm talking figuratively, obviously, but it's not my job to go in and sort of change it, but it is for me to point out things maybe that they've become so used to that they've not really questioned. It's like, if there is that pile of books, or maybe there is a room with a light off that never turns on, they've become so used to that it's become a blind sight to them. It's like very much this concept of Johari window. Do you know the concept of the Johari window?
No.
It's like known to self, known to others. You can. It's very simple. It's called a window because it's split into quarters, and the concept is that there's some things that we know that others don't know about us. There's some things that others know that we don't know about us. Obviously, I've never sat in a room with myself. I've never seen the back of my head. Never seen my eyes, directly, etc. So there's elements of our experience, or there's elements of the way we behave that we may not be aware of. And to some extent, therapists' job is also to point some of those things out. And that's not always, critical. It could be positive.
Yeah.
It could be me reflecting back to a client that they just spoke in a very articulate, very clear way, and with, I don't know, clear signs of empathy or clear signs of intelligence. And it's not, and I don't mean that, I'm meant to fawn over a client and make them feel great or anything, but it's more about, I'm furthering understanding. So if I was to point something like that out to a client, it's so that they can become more aware of their own qualities. And instead, because obviously, unsurprisingly, a lot of clients that turn up for therapy often can have negative self-image or self-esteem issues, things like that. So, to say or to point out some aspects of a client and how they are as being positive, it's not, it's not quite the same as, I'm not complimenting them to make them feel good. I'm trying to kind of just get them to have a clearer view of themselves, in any way. Really.
And I suppose you're also, to some clients, showing them that just talking about themselves is a worthwhile and a normal thing to do. Because I imagine there's some people who they're just not used to that. Maybe they've never been in relationships where they just talk openly about themselves.
Yeah. I mean, I think that can be revolutionary and revelatory for a lot of clients, because like you say, they could come from a family background, or maybe it's family and sort of subcultural background where you don't really talk about what you feel, or you don't talk about your own worries and insecurities, etc. Not that that's always what someone's going to come and talk about, but the idea that you can expose yourself, I mean that, in language form at least, to be open enough to talk about
your mind.
And your mind and your fears and your insecurities, and maybe something that for some people, I mean, I would say for my generation, and definitely for the generations that came before me, the idea that you do that might never occur to you as being okay.
Yeah.
And it might be you've had experiences or emotional kind of perspectives or self-concept from when you were 10 years old or 12 years old that you've never actually shared with another human being, and then you come into a therapy room 30 or 40 years later and you're saying these things about yourself that you know have always been in there, but you've never really said it. It can be really liberating, just that in itself, beyond like new discoveries, just that process of finally saying what's been in your mind for decades. It's like that's, to put it in a very therapeutic form, I would say that is very healing in itself.
And I suppose it's something that you can only know and appreciate the value of it through your own experience of it. So I suppose there might be some people who think, well, I can't see the value in it. Maybe they think, well, maybe some people that they just think, well, I've gotten well in life. I've never had things that have really bothered me. But then there might also be others who think, well, yeah, I can see that this bothers me and that bothers me, but why is talking gonna do me any favours?
I mean, I understand why people might think that. If somebody's got a very lively level of communication with close friends and family, then it's possible that they won't necessarily need that, because of course probably the other thing that will be concurrent with that is that they're experiencing a lot of supportive social relationships. So maybe they're right, in that sense maybe they're right. But I think that the effects of being able or having articulated your experience to a new degree, a new intensity, or like a higher resolution, or however we would describe it, they're so impactful in so many ways. Like the level of self-acceptance that can come through the therapeutic process can just put you on another level of I would say like productivity as well, because if you dig into procrastination, as I do, right? So with a lot of clients, I dig into procrastination, what they'll describe as just being lazy, what they'll describe as self-sabotage, etc. Some people might just assume that, oh, that's what I'm like. You get this phrase quite a lot in therapy. That's just the way I am. It's like that's not a defining factor. That's not actually, you can't define yourself through that. And to take away some of those, like I say, self-sabotaging type of behaviours can absolutely change your life, because it may be, to give it a kind of sort of a stupid analogy, it's kind of like, maybe I'm avoiding asking a boss for a raise, or asking a boss for to apply for a different role, and it's all because of what may seemingly be fairly subtle self-sabotage or procrastination. Maybe I don't quite make the application, or I think, oh, I'll do it next year, or through the therapeutic process, understanding why you're procrastinating, understanding that that's usually very much to do with perfectionism, or to do with some anxiety in some form or another. You can be aware of that and move through that, instead of allowing it to be a boundary that just always knocks you back. And then if that can snowball hugely in somebody's life, so that within 5 years there'll be their life and their lifestyle and their relationships even can be almost unrecognizable and inconceivable to the person that first came into the therapy room. I mean, I've had clients like that, that by the time we finished up, or depends on why we finish up, but let's say they move, or they get a new job, or they get married or whatever, they often comment, that I never thought that I'd ever be doing this or ever live like this. And that I would say is one of the biggest values that someone can, and they're just everyday values, right? They're like transforming your life on a practical or external level, or but there's obviously, I would say, ways of being that can be, just utterly inconceivable to someone when they first come in. More probably what you could term as existential transformations.
Yeah. On the topic of existential stuff, earlier you mentioned that the idea that some challenges people face are intrinsic to being human, to human nature. So would this imply that whether or not you have a therapist, you need relationships throughout life where you're able to talk in the kind of ways that you might talk during a therapy session, for example?
Yeah, I think so.
In other words, is it an ongoing need to articulate ourselves openly and in the kind of ways you've been describing?
Yes. To put it concisely, yes. To elaborate on that more, I would say it's about the experience of articulation in a broad sense. So maybe for some people to be creative in some form or another, to express it through music or song or poetry, art, etc. I think it's to give it a technical term. It's just the phenomenology of it that's important.
Yeah.
Not whether necessarily everybody could understand it. I mean, I suppose that's partly what's, there's a lot of creative movements that are almost based on the idea that not everybody can understand it. I mean, I don't know whether movements like various visual arts movements, for instance, would have been as valued if they were thought of as just very obvious. Like the whole point is that there's a group of people that resonate with that work, who have had some sort of shared experience, and then the person who's creating feels they're understood by that group, if you see what I mean. If it was just a very broad, everyone can understand, if I write a piece of poetry going, I feel sad when my dog died, kind of thing, like that, the satisfaction, or let's say the meaning of that articulation or that expression is just going to be very low level, I would say. Whereas if you started to talk about the nuances of the experience and the more kind of idiosyncratic experience, and then others resonate with it, or others show that they understand that, and somehow you now feel like you've been heard, or you feel like you've been seen, which of course is a huge part of the therapeutic process. People often say that, I really feel like I was understood, I really feel like someone finally listened to me, or finally saw me, or finally saw me for who I am, etc. So I think that they can come through those sorts of pursuits. Of course, the danger of that is that it can be a bit of a bypass, so you never quite address it, because you'll say, "Oh, I do it through my art, darling,"
Right,
but they don't quite go there. And of course, there's a term that's becoming more common usage, but it's something that I've, frequenting Buddhist centres and Buddhist monasteries for decades. I've seen people being very stark examples of what's described as spiritual bypass. Right? So you just spiritualize your experience, or you spiritualize your behaviours as an excuse to not actually face, maybe the everyday practicalities of life, or as an excuse of not being independent, etc.
Yeah, what do you mean by spiritualise? What would be an example of someone doing that?
well, I suppose classics would be someone not having a job and saying, well, that's just capitalism, and I'm a free spirit, and I get, or I mean, and it's not that I don't have any sympathy for that perspective to some degree, but it's is it that, or is it that you just can't, you're not stable enough to work? Like, let's get straight on this kind of thing, because it may be that somebody wants to live that lifestyle, but then of course what I often see as a therapist talking to clients that are kind of self-describing themselves like that is they're not doing that either. If you see what I mean. They're not really, I don't know, let's say someone wants to live a really alternative lifestyle and I don't know, live in a teepee or live in a camper van or something and get completely off grid. Are they doing that? Well, no, they're not doing that either. They're just sort of sleeping on a friend's sofa and not. You see what I mean? It's kind of like, well, if you're going to do that, are you doing that or not? So that would be my job to challenge that, because I've got no issue with someone if they want to drop off the grid, etc. But if they're self-describing as I've dropped off the grid, but actually all I've done is they just don't work, and that's a completely different situation. So it's my job in some ways to, I'm digging out clients' values a lot of the time. What are your values, and are you living by those values? Rather than what are the values you say you have, but actually you're not. I think that comes about. For instance, if someone says their value is health and fitness, but it's clearly not. And then they describe that their daily situation is, well, I'm at work, and then when I get home, I've got the kids to look after, and then I sit and I talk to the kids, or I play with the kids, or blah, 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 blah. It's like, okay, well, so what you're really saying is your value is your family life, or your value is, giving your children an enriched home environment. There's nothing wrong with that, but let's be clear on what the value really is here, because it's not health and fitness. If you're not actually doing it ever, then it can't actually be.
Maybe that is one of the things that cause problems where, well, I do in principle value health and fitness, but I do also have a family or this or that also I value, and perhaps more so that I'm prioritising it. And so I can imagine for some people they're not doing the fitness side of it, frustrates them.
Yes, and this is the beauty of articulating your experience, right? So, and I see this happen time and time again. So let's use that as an example, and it is just an example. But let's say they get clear on, oh, actually, my higher value, my core value is my children and my children's home life, etc., and me giving them an experience of having a caring, involved parent. Because that what happens there is there's some self-understanding that happens. Then they feel less guilty or less negative about the fact that they don't go to the gym or don't go for a run or whatever it is they're aspiring to. And the whatever you could call that, the kind of the settled energy that comes from that, the acceptance that comes from that gives them a better self-concept, a better sense of self-esteem. And then they start going to the gym because they feel better about themselves, right? So it kind of often can do that, and that's all by being clear on what's really going on within them. And that would be a good example of when someone goes, "Oh, what's the point of going to therapy?" Those kind of things happen a lot, I would say, just by being clear. People say, "Well, no, I'll think about it," and like it all becomes clearer. So
interesting. So well, I feel like there's some sociological questions opened up there really, about how the world we live in, and the fact that, I mean, everyone I know is always extremely busy, so many competing demands on their time, and so I think it's so easy to actually, even if you are a productive person, to be thinking about all the things that you're not doing and beating yourself up for. So I mean, we could come on to that, but it might be a good topic for another podcast too, the ways in which we're having to to try and balance our competing demands in the world we live in.
Yeah, I mean, something that comes up a lot in therapy is the results of, whatever we call it, a post-industrialized type of lifestyle, right? Because it's also orientated towards individualism and consumerism, etc. So that's pretty much the polar opposite of the way we developed for a long time as human beings. Living in groups, sharing roles. Like having to oversee every aspect of our life, more or less, compared to being able to fall asleep at any time of day and know there's 60 other people that are watching out for lions or tigers or, I don't know, an invading group or whatever. We're now in this kind of nuclear family situation where it's, all right, might be between me and my partner, but that's pretty much it, and that in itself inherently is going to bring up anxiety, because we're not really developed for that, not developed to have to oversee every aspect of our life in such a way that we do these days. So that's definitely a thing. I mean, I don't know, I mean, there's many, like you said, many tangential subjects that we can go off of the therapeutic benefits of talking. I mean, without sort of being too anthropological, I think that therapy, and I'm sure I'm not the first person to say this, although I've not heard anyone say this directly, but probably if I trawled through copies of Therapy Today in the last 30 years, monthly publication, probably find something on, in those traditional communities, there are usually figures that live there that are referred to as medicine men or shamans, etc., who are a bit more removed from the general group. They usually live at one end of the village somewhere, maybe a bit further out, and if someone's sick, and when I say sick I mean that in a broad sense, they go and speak to the medicine man. And who is he? He's the character, or she, who's they're not really involved in the gossip of the group. They've got a different perspective, they've got different experiences. And what's a therapist? It's someone who's not really involved with the group, because confidentiality's, we've kind of created a model that fits into post-industrial society that kind of replicates that, like the confidentiality contract. The fact that I'm not going to go and talk to their family or tell them their secrets. Often if you look at a lot of these whatever we describe them as, traditional tribes, etc., that's often an element of, you go and speak to the shaman and what they tell you is between you and them. You don't tell anyone else, otherwise the power of the medicine is not as strong. And I'm not saying that to trivialize it, I think that is how it works, and that's part of how therapy works, is that it does feel that it is a special space. It is a sacred space. I mean, as you're aware, we've got a ridiculous amount of plants in it, and part of the reason, you can't see it on the film, but part of the reason I do that is because it's a living symbol of growth. It's a living symbol of harmony of nature. It's a living symbol of something that comes out of the darkness into the light. I mean, they're all therapeutic themes, and I personally, I find it supportive, and I know a lot of clients find it a nurturing environment to feel that there's plants around us. So there's, I mean, I know I've gone off on a slight tangent there, but I certainly think that there's functions there's functions of the therapeutic process that has emerged as a healing response, almost like society's immune system
Mm.
reacting to the pathology, I would say, that can often arise out of post-industrial society. Because I think, you know, there's clear signs that the way we live. I mean, if you look at the wellbeing movement in general, right, half of the time what's being recommended, no, not half the time, I'd say the majority of the time what's being recommended is that we find some way to mimic old Paleolithic, high Paleolithic lifestyle, you know,
Yeah.
Paleolithic diet, or, you know, other than veganism, for instance, but Paleolithic diet is often sort of some aspect of it, you know. You only eat food that's natural. You only eat food. I mean, the phrase that often comes out is something that hasn't got a barcode on it. You know, i.e. that it's not ultra processed. Get more daylight. Get more blue light and orange light at the right time. What's that? That's mimicking Paleolithic lifestyle. You know, optimal sleep is often sort of described in the context of the way, you know, weighted blankets. I think the running kind of theory on why weighted blankets are so effective is that, however, some people might think this is a silly idea, but this is the current theory, is that we used to sleep under heavy animal skins, and so the pressure or the weight of that skin mimics how we've developed to sleep. You know, you can keep on going, like it's almost everything that we say. You know, levels of exercise. Why is it important? That's how we used to live. You know, it's always about how we used to live. So I think there's definite themes there to consider. You know, it's almost like we've got to a point of our technology's got to a certain degree, and now we're almost trying to reverse all the benefits, or not the benefits, but the effects of a sedentary lifestyle, for instance.
And you feel like that's what's partly going on with the need for psychotherapy.
Yeah, I mean, given that I mentioned the neurology thing, of course, you know, there's so much to do with gut biome, for instance, and the blood-brain barrier, and the neurological effects of exercise, for instance, on well-being, mitigating effects of anxiety and depression. You know, all of those things would have been present in a society where, if you wanted to go out and get food, you had to work for it. You know, and it would probably take you a long time to carry it or process it and cook it. And, you know, there's a lot of effort involved, and I mean, I think there is definitely huge motifs of old styles of living that seem to be beneficial for health. You know, even go back 100 years, everyone was eating organic, right? I don't think that ever changes. You know, like the causes of a lot of let's say mental, psychological and physical disease seems to stem half the time from the effects of living a post-industrial kind of lifestyle. So
well, that could be a topic for another episode, maybe.
I mean, I think we probably touched on a few gateways into other episodes, but I mean, I know we've got, maybe we should say this, we've got like a few ideas or a few episodes that have we've spoken about quite a bit. So, but today we thought, as an introduction, that why talking is therapeutic would be a appropriate first episode, given that what we're doing, where we are, which is, I don't think we actually said that we're in my.
No, we didn't.
Oh, so we're filming now in my therapy practice room in central Manchester. So we didn't say that, and that's normally where we will be filming. Although we have got a few. We've got an episode coming up that will be filmed in Glasgow, so that's going to be. But you'll find out about that in the future. So maybe on that note we can wrap it up.
Yeah, seems a good place to wrap it up.
Yeah. So thank you for listening. Or probably not watching because it's not particularly visually exciting, but thank you for listening, and if you have, then please like and subscribe, as everyone always says these days, but I'm going to say it too. And hopefully we'll have another episode out in the very near future. All right, thank you, Richard.
Thank you.
Thank you, Lee. All right.
Thank you.